Okay, here we go with part two. Penelope's fast asleep. I hope my voice doesn't do that to you guys as well. And if it does, hey, I don't know what to say at this point in time. Let us then talk about another theory of motivation. And I don't know that this is necessarily a need theory. It kind of straddles a couple need areas. I'm going to present it. You take your pick. Here is homework 14, part 3. These are not in order necessarily to the parts of the assignment, but you'll see the assignment. There's a two-factor theory of motivation that Hertzberg demonstrates. And this is really hygiene factors, and the lack of hygiene factors is the term that Hertzberg uses, leads to dissatisfaction and demotivation. So when we see a lack of certain desired qualities in a job, like decent pay, good working conditions, safe working conditions, adequate sick time, right? These motivate people when they're absent. So this is really a side that looks at need deficiency motivates, and in this case it motivates us to complain, or motivates us maybe to seek other work, or motivate us to change a system. Now, the central area, we might have employees that are dissatisfied and demotivated, right? Here, we step up into a neutral spot where employees are not dissatisfied, but they're not motivated. And there's a very tricky concept at work here. Now, motivating factors are thought to be positive satisfaction and motivated generating. So what Maslow is saying is, you can address deficient needs, but that won't increase motivation. So really, because it's two factors, as a manager you have two things to consider. Are the basic needs of my employees for safety, security, etc. being met? And if so, then they won't be dissatisfied. But meeting those needs does nothing to increase their motivation. So satisfaction and motivation really in Hertzberg's models become two separate issues, and we have to consider both. So let us then look at what might dissatisfy someone according to Hertzberg, and that is deficiency in a hygiene factor. So jobs with poor company policies, jobs with poor administration, jobs with poor technical supervision, jobs with poor salary, jobs with poor interpersonal relationship with supervisor, jobs with poor working conditions. What do we know? Hey, those then work to dissatisfy the employee. But let's suppose we repair those things. What we've done then is move the employee from a state of dissatisfaction to a state of no dissatisfaction. So we can create good company policies, administration, but notice these are essentially expectations. And they motivate in that they make people want to leave when they're not met. But once they're met, there is no motivational quality to them. So all is not lost. Let's get these things met, right? Let's create good company policies. But let us then move on to Hertzberg's motivator factors. Now the motivator factors, what do we know? Well, what we're doing now is attempting to manipulate employee satisfaction. Jobs that don't offer achievement, right? Jobs that don't offer recognition, right? Jobs that don't offer stimulating work, jobs that don't allow us to take responsibility or put responsibility on us for things that aren't our responsibility. Remember Deming's 85-15 rule, for example, right? If you're being blamed for something that's systemic, then but advancement, right? So what do we do to create satisfaction? Well, we engineer jobs such that they offer the potential for achievement, that they offer potential for recognition, that they offer stimulating work, responsibility, and advancement. So two-pronged theory, right? That is, what we do is have people in a position to gain rewards. Now, let us think in terms of employee satisfaction surveys. Right? What do we want to measure? Well, probably two things. We want to measure employees' relationships with policies that might create dissatisfaction up to satisfaction. But if we ask a person, are they satisfied with their job, then they may be satisfied with the hygiene factors, but that doesn't mean that they're a motivated employee. So when we're assessing employee attitudes towards work, we have to assess their level of satisfaction or dissatisfaction, but then we have to also assess their amotivation to motivation. So it's two separate constructs, and I think Hertzberg is brilliant in presenting it that way, and it can do a lot for us to understand the psychologic that's present in our employees. Now, since we're talking about gaining rewards here, I think that's a natural transition to talk about Skinner, B.F. Skinner, and his radical behaviorism. Right? And believe it or not, there's a bfskinner.org. I mean, Skinner's passed away, but there's a website, an organization devoted to Skinnerian conditioning, his radical behaviorism. So he believed that the most powerful influence on behavior are its consequences, and that might be a hard point to argue, right? And a little on the foundation. It was established in '89 to publish significant literary and scientific works in the analysis of behavior, okay? And to this day. And behaviorism is still studied, it's still researched, and it's still applied. Right? One of the number one users of behavioral theory, what do you think? Well, casinos. Think about it, because casinos want to create the behavior, let's say, of a slot machine of pulling that lever and pulling that lever and pulling it again and again and again and again and again, right? So how do you cause someone to pull that lever more than they normally would? Well, you apply the behavioral principles, right? And this is operant conditioning. And this will represent then homework 14, number 1, right? And so this section is tuned to the behaviorism. So what we do is we have a situation and we observe a behavior, and once we observe that behavior, we apply a reinforcer, and then we have increased likelihood of that behavior in a similar future situation. Some might argue an identical future situation. Similar is probably good for human beings to a certain extent as well, because we can generalize stimulus response combinations to a certain degree. It depends on the species we're talking about, on how effective that works. So, what do we know then? The power of reinforcement. That is, we supply positive reinforcers after we observe a successful act, right? So this is a stimulus that's presented after we see a behavior that engenders the desire to commit that behavior again. So we might give a salesperson a commission. If they make a sale, hey, here's a 5% reward, right? That is a 5% commission for making that sale. And the idea is if you give someone 5% commission, then they will go out and they will sell more to earn that 5% again and again and again. So this is gaining a reward. But Skinner, through his research and the use of the Skinner box, he would place a pigeon in a box or various other animals and manipulate the consequences, manipulate rewards or punishments to see how it affects behavior. Well, negative reinforcers are removal of an unpleasant stimulus contingent upon a particular behavior. So this is avoiding something negative. Now notice both of these are reinforcers. They reinforce the behavior. Wow. Here I did something and it generated a positive outcome, right? So I added good to that person's life. But think about it. Wow, here I did something and it eliminated a negative outcome, right? Negative times a negative then equals a positive. If we remember, -1 times -1 equals +1, right? So when you remember your umbrella, it prevents you from getting wet. Being prevented from getting wet in the rain then encourages you to take your umbrella more often, right? Because it eliminated something bad, that is getting wet from the rain. So the behavior of remembering the umbrella is reinforced by not getting wet in the rain. So why is this important? Well, I want you to consider this. Let's suppose you're a startup business. You don't got a lot of money coming in. You're bare bones with your employees. You have a little office building, and you have your let's say 3 employees, and one of those employees maintains the office, which includes cleaning the bathrooms, so that the customers can go to the bathroom while they're sitting in your office. Right? Well, let's suppose that this employee whose responsibility is cleaning the restrooms, and how many of you like to clean restrooms? We better get that out of the way right now. Most of us are not crazy about cleaning restrooms, but let's suppose that this employee sells a contract. They're chatting up a customer who comes in while you're busy with another customer, and the employee brings the customer in and says, well, we can work out the details, but the customer's already agreed to this purchase. And you go, oh my God, this is bitchin'. You sold another contract. Oh my God. What do you want to do? You want to reinforce that the person sold the contract. Your employee sold the contract. But there's a problem. You'd love to give them a commission. You'd love to give them a bonus. But you're operating your business. It's a startup. You're on a thin edge of profitability, right? And you simply don't have money to give them. What could you do? Well, for example, you could offer then, you know what? I am so pleased that you sold that contract. I can't tell you how pleased I am, but I'm going to show you how pleased I am. For the next 2 months, I know it's your duty to clean the restrooms. For the next 2 months, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to clean the restrooms for you. So take that off your plate. It's not part of your responsibilities for the next 2 months. I love the fact that you sold this contract, and I can't give you a bonus. We don't have the money to do that, but I sure as hell can take a burden off your back, and that's what I'm going to do. Notice, I removed something unpleasant. It's a net positive. We can be very creative about how we reward employees. We don't have to necessarily toss cash at them. We can also demonstrate our love for our employees by doing something that they don't necessarily like to do. Now, when we traffic in reinforcement, Skinner would use food rewards for animals typically. This is not really a successful strategy for humans, but humans are sensitive to secondary reinforcers. We understand that cash can buy food. So secondary reinforcers can be translated or purchase primary reinforcers. So these are conditioned reinforcers we learn about. So cash, bonuses, vacations, awards, these are all secondary reinforcers, right? It's not all about bringing donuts to the job, but that works too. So let's take the flip side now. We've got 2 types of punishment to discuss. Positive punishment is add bad, right? So punishment bad, I add some element to this person's existence that they will perceive as bad. I add bad. So perhaps the one that we're most familiar with as children is perhaps we were in a family where a certain level of corporal punishment was allowed. We get a spanking. And what the parent is doing then is they're adding bad. They're adding swats to your ass, so to speak. Right? Now, negative punishment, this is when we remove an attractive stimulus. So we take away good. Add bad, take away good. They both equal the same thing, a punishment. Right? So power usually disappears when the threat of punishment is removed. So if you want to use punishment as your go-to, just remember then it ties you to that person. It kind of chains you to their ankle, if you will. You're both chained together because you have to be there to observe the bad act, to apply punishment as necessary. Punishment should always be of the last resort. Right? So punishment often triggers aggression, especially aggressive punishment, triggers aggression in children. That's been demonstrated. But punishing employees, like insulting them in front of their coworkers, can lead to aggression, resentment, hostility. It's not an effective strategy, right? The weird thing about punishment, people love punishment, but it doesn't teach you what to do. That's correct. It just says, don't do that, and you apply the punishment. It doesn't offer a constructive alternative. So if you're getting the idea I'm not a big fan of punishment, I'm not. It just is not, How many of you, think about it, how many of you had siblings? Or have siblings, probably a better way to put it. Did your parents punish you equally? Or was there unfairness in the way punishment was levied to each of you? Did you compare punishments and say, oh my God, they always get away with murder and I do the smallest thing and you come down on me like a ton of bricks? One of the aspects of using punishment is people often then interpret that the punishment is being applied unfairly. Oh, they always get away with everything. And I do one little thing and you come down on me, right? So, what's most likely to make punishment work? If you got to use punishment, here's the formula. Brought to you by Jeremy Bentham. or maybe Cesar Beccaria, and we're talking kind of 1800s here, when they were looking at penal systems and decided how they should operate. What's most likely to make punishment work? It's got to be swift. That is, it's got to follow the act as closely as possible in time. It's got to be certain. So people will commit a bad act if they don't believe the punishment will occur. If the punishment is certain, then they're less likely to commit the bad act, and it's got to be severe enough to make an impact. If the person doesn't care about the punishment, if it's not severe. So that's your formula. If you want to use punishment, I'd prefer you didn't, but that's up to you. Swift, certain, and severe. Right? So 4 kinds of consequences then. Let's wrap it up and put them all into a handy-dandy table. The goal, the stimulus, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to increase the behavior, or am I trying to decrease the behavior? So let's go with increasing behavior. What do I have available to me? Well, I can add good. And see, that's the positive. So positive reinforcement, add good if you will. You give someone a bonus if you're able to do that, right? But if you're increasing behavior, if you want to increase behavior but you don't, let's say, have rewards available to you necessarily, then you can use negative reinforcement. You can take away bad. Right? And it's the same thing. Now here's another example. Remember, I used the umbrella and protects us from the rain. Well, let's suppose you have a headache. Oh my God, my head hurts so badly, right? And the behavior now is I take an aspirin. Someone says, here, take this aspirin. So I take this aspirin, and the headache goes away. So that took away bad. So what is your prediction for my aspirin use in the future? Yeah, I'm more likely to use aspirin if I have a headache, right? So that's the negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is about the trickiest of the 4 concepts for most people. Now, positive punishment, let's add bad. Remember, add positive, right? Punishment, add bad, right? You're speeding down the highway, state trooper pulls you over and says, I want to add something to your life. I want to add this citation to your existence, right? They've added bad to discourage you from speeding in the future. Or negative punishment in this respect is, boy, this is my 3rd speeding ticket. They asked me to come into the special traffic court, and the judge looks at me and says, boy, it doesn't look like giving you tickets has much of an effect. So what we're going to do is take away your license so you can't drive at all. And that is taking away good, right? So that would be negative punishment. Negative because take away. So if you can remember add or take away, then you can kind of move yourself through this. Now, Skinner did so much research on the manipulation of consequences, observing what it did to behavior. And what Skinner says then is we could shape behavior, that is, through the process of incrementing. It's rare that we can change a behavior all in one shot. Behavioral changes are usually a process of what the fancy term is subsequent approximations. So here's the undesired behavior, here's the desired behavior. What we do is we move people a step at a time to the desired behavior. Subsequent approximations, that is, each step is closer to the desired, or better approximates the desired behavior. Right? So we use these small incremental changes, right? And maybe it's like cigarette smoking. You want to quit smoking? One way to do that is we smoke 20 cigarettes a day this week. We smoke 19 cigarettes a day next week. We smoke 18 cigarettes a day the following week until we're smoking no cigarettes. And then we provide a reward for completing each week successfully. Right? So begin with continuous reinforcement to acquire the new behaviors. And then you can shift to reinforcing only some of the positive responses every now and again. That releases you from having to be there all the time. Notice, casinos use this. You don't get paid off every time you pull that handle on a slot machine. You get paid off every now and again. Right? So that would be a variable reinforcement strategy that keeps people playing. And never take good performance for granted, because if you just stop reinforcing good behavior, say, hey, we got it, we got good behavior going on now, and I'm going to worry about something else, and I'm not going to reinforce the good behavior anymore. What happens? Well, think extinction, that is, the good behavior may then become extinct on its own because we've no longer supplied a reward. So what can we say? If you're looking for a book to read, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, B.F. Skinner, and what an amazing overview of his theories. at a societal level. So at this point in the 1970s, Skinner's stepping out of the laboratory and is going to say, look, this is how society is screwed up because of the way it manipulates rewards and punishments. And I'll leave you with this from Skinner. Right? It's a surprising fact that those who object most violently to the manipulation of behavior nevertheless make the most vigorous efforts to manipulate minds. And what he's saying is that the behavioral control mechanisms in society are all screwed up, but we sure as hell are proficient in propaganda and trying to influence people. We think that's okay to influence what people think, but it's not okay to influence how people behave, is the premise of the book. It's a fascinating read. It's not the easiest read on the planet, but Skinner is pretty accessible, but it is technical. I enjoyed it, so you might enjoy it as well. And it really broke down a lot of stereotypes I had about behaviorism that I acquired in my psychology education. And I think often that the only thing we know about Skinner is something that we heard in Psych 1100, this brief little snippet. We never read any of his original work, and we have a meager understanding at best of operant conditioning. But then we go through psychology, we get our degrees, and we think, oh my God, behaviorism, that's a dead science, etc., and how shallow, etc. I know I fell prey to that as a social psychologist, but in reading Beyond Freedom and Dignity, reading Skinner's original words, I said, wow, Skinner was as much a social psychologist as he was a behaviorist, and he does really understand the human condition. So a lot of times we need to give these authors, these researchers, these theorists their full due and read their original work. I'm becoming a big fan of that every year that goes by. Let's call this the end of part 2, and we'll move on to